Here we go. Week number 4 of November, where we are focusing our Q&A episodes in particular on leadership. And we brought in a subject material expert, Leif Babin, to help us out with this. If you don't know who Leif is, make sure to go back and check out our other previous 3 episodes. They're absolutely incredible. But Leif is a former Navy SEAL. He's a best-selling author. He's co-founder of Echelon Front, and they do a lot in the business side, in particular on how to develop leaders, which is a skill set. But today, the question is, Leif, this one I'm really, really excited about. I was excited about all of them, but this one in particular is the way to close it out. After visiting hundreds of businesses, and I wrote this because I assumed it's hundreds. It might even be more than that. It might be way more than that. You could give clarity. What's the number one thing you see causing friction in leadership teams? And the reason why this is so interesting for me is that you'll go put on these events where you'll, have like 50 guys go out in the, paintball field and learn leadership within that org structure. You'll go out and you'll put on 1,000-person musters where you're talking about leadership at a high level, more of a presentation perspective. But you're also going out there and dealing on a micro level with teams. And there has to be a thread that you see. I would love to talk about it.
No doubt, Jason. First of all, the only thing that makes me a subject matter expert on leadership is that I've made every mistake that you could possibly make as a leader. And so I think that's important to clarify, is that I'm certainly not standing on a soapbox talking about, look at me as the amazing leader. I've had to learn a lot of these things the hard way. And so one of the things we get to do at Echelon Front is try to pass those leadership lessons on to try to prevent people from having to learn those lessons the hard way, but to actually learn from our mistakes. We've, just to answer your question, we totaled it up recently. And so we just had our 20th muster, which is our 2-day leadership conference. The total number of attendees in just musters alone is over 13,000 people. And of the total number of companies and organizations that we work with, and that includes, law enforcement agencies and first responders, fire departments, nonprofits, people in the education space, as well. But we've worked with a total of over 1,600 companies and organizations over the last 13 years that we've been doing this. So we have worked with thousands of leaders, and there is no question that the number one thing that causes friction within any team is ego. It's ego. And when you start to pull the thread on a problem, it's there at the root of that problem is an ego issue. And this is why that we say the most important quality in a leader is humility. It's humility, because we all have an ego. And if you didn't have an ego, you would have never been you would have never, won the CrossFit games, right? You've never been a champion. If you didn't have an ego, you want to do that. You want to outperform people. You want to actually do well. You wouldn't want to be the best in class. If you're building a product or delivering a service, in a particular type of company, ego drives us to want to do better and perform better. And we took great pride in my time in the SEAL teams, we were going to go into an area that nobody else could get into. Other U.S. forces said, man, that's crazy. It's too dangerous. We took pride in being able to go into areas that other people didn't want to go or didn't want to take the risk to go into those areas. So ego is a great driver, but ego can also be the most catastrophic thing. And it can lead, ego can lead you to your own destruction as well. And there's so many examples of that I could give you. One of the most stark ones is an example of, there was a special operations unit in Ramadi while we were there in 2006. And there was a National Guard unit that had been on the ground that was in charge of the battle space. And the National Guard unit, National Guard these are part-time soldiers. They do their 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks out of the year. Well, they've been activated and they'd been in Ramadi for over a year. So 1 year in what at the time was the most dangerous battlefield in Iraq. They'd been there, from 2005 into 2006. And so these National Guard soldiers, they'd gone from part-time soldier to hardened combat warriors. They were in the thick of the fight every single day. And we very quickly realized they'd look at us and think that we had this, the Navy SEALs are here. They got this cool gear and they have these short barrel rifles and they have these cool lasers and better night vision than we do. And we're looking back at these young soldiers and the Marines that were attached to them and thinking, these guys have fired more rounds through their weapons than all of us in my entire unit are going to ever fire throughout our entire careers. They've been just in the fight over and over and over and over again. So we were just humbled and honored to work with them and try to help and support them in some way. There was a special operations unit that came into theater that wanted to launch on an operation, and they wanted to use our Iraqi soldiers. That was our partner force as a local partner force, because everybody was required to take Iraqi soldiers out with them on their operations. And so, good on this special operations unit. They wanted to go get in the fight. But as they started talking about the mission and how they wanted to execute it, and they wanted us to accompany them, they were going to go down a road that was, we had been told by the battle space owners, the Army National Guard that had been there for, a year, like, you can't drive down that road. You're going to get blown up. And so I told them that. I was like, listen, I don't think you should drive down this road. This is, we've been told this is not the way. They're like, I don't care what the National Guard says. Those guys are National Guard. We've got these big armored vehicles. We're going to drive down that road. Everything's going to be fine. So I didn't feel good about that, and so I was like, man, I was kind of on the fence. Look, I wanted to try to help them if we could. And I went over and talked to the National Guard company commander. And this was a guy, he was I believe he was a college professor, and but an awesome guy, like highly respected warrior.
And just got the call and ended up in Iraq for,
He was a National Guard leader, but this guy has 1 year of combat experience in the worst environment imaginable. His guys had been in hundreds and hundreds of gun battles, and conducted hundreds of combat missions. And they'd taken a number of casualties. I mean, just highly respected leader. We had a great relationship with him. And so I walked into his office and said, hey, here's what's going on. Here's an operation that, this unit wants us to be a part of. What do you think about this? And he's like, you're never going to make it down that road. He's like, and he told me if I wanted to get a bunch of my guys killed and not even get to our objective, then I would try to drive down that road. Like, that's how stark it was. And so I said, okay, well, I appreciate your input. Thank you so much for telling me this. I went back and talked to that special operations unit. And I said, hey, here's what they're telling me. We can't be a part of this mission. And I highly recommend that you do not launch on this mission. And if you do launch on this mission, do not take that road. Immediately, those guys are National Guard. They don't know what they're talking about. We're special operators. And these guys have been on the ground for, I think, maybe 2 weeks. 2 weeks, and maybe they've done a couple of missions. We're talking about guys who've been on the ground for a year and done hundreds and hundreds of combat missions, and they were just dismissed their input. And that they launched in that operation despite my protests and encouragement not to. And they didn't even make it. I don't think they even made it 250 yards down the road. They got blown up, blew up a vehicle. Thank God nobody got killed, but several guys got wounded. And it was a horrible thing. And it was simply all driven just by ego. All driven by ego. Like, I'm just not going to listen, to what somebody's telling me who. This is so, one thing that I learned from Jocko, the reason that humility is the most important quality in a leader is that you've got to be able to self-assess. And you have to recognize that you might actually be wrong. So if I come up, let's say we're in the business environment. We're not even talking about combat here. We're in the business environment. I want to launch on this plan, to go into a new market area, new opportunity for us. I come up with a plan, and you as my colleague, Jason, say, like, I don't like that plan. Well, if I have a big ego, I'm going to say, well, Jason doesn't know what he's talking about. Jason's in it. I got more experience than Jason. You just need to get on board with this plan. This plan's going to win. Whereas the best leaders who can suppress their ego and actually who are humble are saying, interesting. Why does Jason not like my plan? Does Jason not want us to win? Does Jason not want us to actually go out and take on a new market opportunity? Of course not. So what is it that Jason knows that maybe I don't know? And so if I'm a humble leader, I could say, hey, Jason, talk to me. I hear you don't like my plan. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to get some insight into what why you don't like the plan and what you think we should do better. And then I can listen to you. I can take some notes. I can think about what you're actually saying, and I can learn from you. You may have a very valid point. And if I have an open mind, I can listen and take that input and make some adjustments so that we can actually be more successful and win. If I don't have an open mind, I'm going to shut you down. I'm going to carry on with the plan. And sometimes people will even just fly the plane into the ground just to prove that their plan is the right plan. They can never admit that the plan was the wrong plan. And I mean, probably the greatest example that I can think of is that horrible situation with Ocean Gate. Remember the Titan submersible sub that went down
Oh,
to
yeah,
sea
yeah, yeah,
with the
yeah, 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 yeah.
Titanic? When I started reading about that, and their CEO, he had a member of his team, I think it was their COO, had said, "Hey, boss, this thing isn't safe. We should have this safety checked by people in this industry." He dismissed that guy. I think the guy ended up resigning. And then when he was asked about it by the press, that the CEO said that the Titan submersible sub was obscenely safe. That was his comment. Obscenely safe. And we see how that went, right? He was killed along with everybody that was on that expedition. Horrible, horrible situation. But just an example of how ego can be the most destructive force in any organization out there. So you've got to be able to keep your ego in check. You've got to be able to keep an open mind. You got to actually recognize that you might actually be wrong. Because when you can't check your ego, you can't listen to anybody else. You can't learn from anybody else. You can't adopt new methodologies or new technology. You can't. You start to get complacent. If you're having some success, you start to really take your enemy or your competition for granted, even on the battlefield, certainly in the business world, which really is setting you up for absolute failure. And the worst part of it is that you can't self-assess. You can't look in the mirror and say, what can I do better? What can I do to actually improve? And when you do that, if you can't actually self-assess, you're never going to improve in any way, shape, or form. And I think that's the most destructive thing that you can do as a leader. It's the most destructive thing for any organization.
Oh, Leif, we talked week one about how discipline is a muscle that you can train. Is humility also something that you can train and improve? And if so, how do you go about doing that?
Man, Gabe, that's a fantastic question. I think it is. I think it is because I think that in life it's be humble or get humbled, and I think that you will. If you experience enough life, you're going to be humble. And you can see this in combat veterans, right? If you talk to somebody that is inherently cocky, that is inherently and they kind of have this air of overconfidence about them, even if they've deployed, overseas, even if they've had a few rounds shot over their head, you could tell right away that they've never truly been tested. They've never truly been tested, because somebody that's seen a lot of combat they're going to have been beaten. They're going to have been outmaneuvered. They're going to have had the enemy do things that they couldn't have perceived. They're going to, have made calls that they wish they'd made something different. These are things that I'll always carry with me. Throughout the course of my life, and any combat veteran is the same way. It's the same thing for anybody. Anybody's experienced that kind of, that and been truly tested is going to have failures, right? They're going to realize how easily things can go wrong. So I think just you can train yourself to realize that when you feel some red flags in yourself, hey, Jason's pushing back on my plan right now, and I'm starting to get angry about it. You know what? That's my ego talking. That's my ego talking. Let me take a breath. Let me calm down. Let me detach from the situation, put my ego aside. What is Jason's point? What does Jason actually want? Does he want us to be successful? Yeah, he does want us to be successful. Okay, well, let me listen to what he has to say, why he maybe doesn't like my plan and thinks that we should do something differently. So I think you can recognize those red flags in yourself, and you can train yourself. And it starts with that detachment piece that we talked about. Is just like, training to be disciplined as well, and developing those discipline habits. It's the same thing. I think when you realize, oh, that's my ego talking right there. Oh, hey, you know what? I didn't like the way my wife put the dishes in the dishwasher, and I'm about to make some snide comment about it. You're like, that's not going to help me in this situation. Let me actually just bury that. Let me think through how this is going to go. And you know what? Hey, if I didn't like the way she put it in the dishwasher, then I can do it a little bit differently. No big deal. We'll make it happen. It's not going to be the end of the world. I'm going to prioritize my relationship with her over anything else. So I think when you realize that it's your ego that's driving a lot of the bad decisions in your world, you start to become aware of it. Then you can recognize the red flags in yourself. Maybe, you can kind of bite your tongue a little bit enough to realize that when you can suppress the ego, listen to others, keep an open mind. So I think it is something that you definitely can improve upon for sure.
When you're talking about detachment, I just want to make sure before we finished up, that I recognize, one of the things that I found to be really helpful, just obviously I've read all the books, I've gone out to your course, I've spent a lot of time with you just talking about stuff just in person. The detachment factor is just so important. And in particular, when Leif and the team talk about detachment, they're talking about three things: detaching from your ego, your emotion, and your perspective. And I think that those are, there you go, those three. I think those are really important factors. And detaching from your ego, you just talked about. Detaching from your emotion, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. But maybe just before we close out on week number 4, you could just briefly discuss like what it means to detach from your perspective. Because I do think that that's an important like kind of uh, factor in all of this we've talked about this month on leadership.
No question, right? None of us are omniscient, right? None of us are all knowing and can see the world in from every different perspective. We all have our own perspective, and so I think that's really powerful, right? If you don't like my plan, then I need to see from your perspective. I need to see from your perspective. In special reconnaissance, which is one of the missions that we do as special operations, as a special operations force, in the SEAL teams. Special reconnaissance, we do what's called a cloverleaf recon. And what that means is, if we're looking at a target site, let's say it's a enemy, missile silo or, something like that. And we're going to be on a hillside, and observing from some distance away, that enemy position. Well, I'm only looking at it from one perspective. On the other side of the building, I may see like three troops. There's like 3 guys walking around with weapons, on the side of the building that I can see from the west side. But if I can't go over to the east side and see from the other side of the building that I can't see, there may be 100 troops sitting on the other side of that building, right? So a cloverleaf recon is you come in basically 360 from these different directions to look at that target from all directions that you can see from, and that opens up your view to better understand the target that you're looking at. And so I think it's every problem like that. We want to try to get as many perspectives as we can. And it's one of the things we talked about in that field training exercise program. As a leader, you're not in a fixed position. You can move around, and you should move around because, hey, all of a sudden I'm inside the building and, if we're actioning a target and we're trying to capture a bad guy, but there's a gunfight going on outside. All of a sudden there's shooting going outside and I can hear there's some chaos. Well, I probably need to get myself at least closer to that gunfight, find out what's actually going on, talk to my leaders, and kind of assess the situation from there. And then I can move back inside the building. I can move around. I'm not in a fixed position. It's the same thing, right? If you're the CEO of a business and all of a sudden you've got a major problem at a job site that's some remote location away from you, well, you should probably get on an airplane and fly out or drive out and get to that job location and actually find out what's going on and get some perspective from the people on the ground there. So that perspective is always going to be unique, always going to be valuable. So that detachment piece is huge, definitely. Attaching from your ego, which is hardest of all, attaching from your emotions, and detaching from your perspective so that you can see from other people's perspectives. And I think part of that is just keeping an open mind and recognizing that, like, we're all humans, we're all flawed, we all have our strengths and weaknesses. And, if I can see from other people's perspectives, something that might have appeared to me like as some sinister intent, if you and I worked together and you didn't give me the support that I needed when I asked for it, I might think that's some sinister intent. Right. But yet, if I see it from your perspective, it may have been completely accidental, or you may have prioritized something that actually was a greater priority, And so I think when you can see the world from other people's perspective, it will open up your mind and enable you to make better decisions as a leader, to not step into pitfalls, as a leader. I hear that one of those pitfalls is, let's say we're having a meeting. Gabe shows up to the meeting and he's 17 minutes late for the meeting. We've been sitting around waiting on Gabe. We're like, hey, Gabe, 17 minutes late, man. Well, you don't think our time is valuable? Jason and I actually have stuff to do. We're important people. And Gabe says, hey, man, there was a major car accident and I stopped to render first aid. I put tourniquets on people and I was doing CPR on a child. I'm sorry I was 17 minutes late to your meeting.
Yep.
And I'm like, Oh, dang. You know what, Gabe? I'm glad you did that. That's actually way more important than the meeting that we're actually about to have, right? So it's just keeping an open mind. It's just seeing from people's perspective that there may actually things that are more important than you and what you're doing. And I think that's our natural tendency, right? Is to focus on whatever we're doing is the most important thing in the entire world. And that's just not reality. So the more that you can detach from your perspective, the more successful you're going to be as a leader.
What a great month, man. Man, it's been a good month. Man, I love these episodes of just leadership talk. I get so much out of this personally. And just when you talk about like military examples, like even like you're talking about the shoot house, I just think about how that relates to me and what I'm talking about. And obviously I've experienced some of this stuff with you, but I think that I just want to make sure that we acknowledge the fact that if you are a leader in your organization or in your home, which I hope you are, there are a lot of skills that we could all develop today and tomorrow and next month and next year and continuously. Like I look at my leadership journey, like I'm barely even getting started. And, I've owned a company for almost 20 years, but I feel like there's so much more in the tank. Frankly, even through this conversation, I'm just like, damn it, I'm way overdue. I got to keep doing more of this. And so I think if you're out there right now and you listen to our podcast, if you engage in our newsletter, if you're on our app training hard, check out what they're doing at Echelon Front. And we also have the Def Reset is coming up here in January, which is super exciting. And so stay tuned for more information on that. Gabe and I will be talking a lot more about that on the podcast, where we're supplying the workouts, but Echelon Front is supplying leadership skills. So stay tuned for that. Leif, as the final kind of episode of the month, we greatly appreciate your expertise. Best place to go, echelonfront.com, and make sure to go check out all the different books that you and Jocko wrote. Is that the best?
That's the best. If you want to learn more about leadership, leadership is absolutely a skill, and every problem that you have in life is a leadership problem. So, you can read Extreme Ownership, you can read Dichotomy of Leadership, you can read Jocko's book, Leadership Strategy and Tactics. There's a whole Warrior Kids series of books about how to get your kids on the path, and it's something that's been awesome for my kids. I know for yours as well, Jason. And yeah, man, I'm really excited for that Def Reset. I think what's cool about that is, the discipline to train and work out and get and prepare your body and mind, I think is so closely related, right? To the discipline and training and preparation development as a leader. And those things I think are intrinsically linked. And so I love what you're doing. I love being a part of the Train Hard crew as well. And just from the moment I've met you, man, you've been very interested in these topics as a leader and wanting to get better, in everything that you do. And I think the more that I talk about this stuff, the more I realize about where I need to apply to my life or where I'm making this mistake. And, in my world, none of us are perfect. We're all on the journey, all trying to get better. And that's what I love about this podcast and what you guys are doing. It's an honor to be a part of it.
Man, well, Leif, we greatly appreciate your time over this. The last month, we've dropped some incredible episodes. Make sure to go back, check out all the other questions. Every Wednesday, we're releasing these in November. So if you're listening to this for the first time, dude, go back, go check out it all. Make sure to check out Echelon Front and keep training hard.